This review was made possible by the Yojo Outlet Center, specializing in vintage G.I. Joe toys and parts.
Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as 4 and BX257, here to bring you another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the Cobra mine and missile launching mini tank, the 1988 IMP. Now the IMP makes its first comic book appearance in the old novel comic run of G.I. Joe in issue number 75. But like a lot of 1987 and 1988 vehicles, it doesn't have any cartoon appearances. One fairly interesting thing about the IMP is that it doesn't come with an action figure driver, but I found a lot of collectors actually give it a very specific character for it to be commanded by, myself included. IMP is an acronym for its payload, the Infrared IMaging Programmable missiles capable of delivering the regular missile payload as well as the mines themselves.
I know I called this thing a mini tank earlier, but perhaps calling it an undersized tank is a bit more accurate, because for your $5 to $6 range back in the 80s, this thing was actually a very substantial toy. It really dwarfs the size of the 1988 Swamp Masher, which was supposed to be in the same price range. And not that much more than, let's say, the 1988 Adder or the 1988 RPV. This thing just seems like it's supposed to be in a class all by its own, but it wasn't. Just to give you an impression of how big this thing is, I'll put it besides the other red tank that you're all familiar with, 1985 HISS tank here. And this is a very standard size for the $10 range, and yet this thing almost looks pretty much the same size. You can also see that while this thing is maroon, which is a very odd choice for a tank, it's not quite as bright red as the SMS HISS tank here. So the more darker, subtle color, I think, is more forgivable. It's also the same maroon that was in the 1985 Cobra Moray, as well as the 1988 Cobra Rocket Sled as well. The IMP has 3 of these large removable rockets, and this rocket rail actually connects to the bottom portions of the front fin and the main back fin. The rocket itself actually splits into 2. And the connection between the front portion and this main cylinder here is actually keyed. So you do have to be careful with that. I mean, you can actually just put it right on there and it kind of locks into place, but it really locks hard into place when you have it keyed correctly, like this. Just kind of snaps into place. And of course, we have 8 of these little mines. They look like wheels or gears, but they're supposed to be mines. And while the box art and the box back actually depicts 7 of these, there are supposed to be 8 on each of the 3 rockets for a total of 24 altogether. One interesting thing I've discovered is, well, there's a rail in the front and then a tip here. And while you're supposed to put the rail in with the main tip like this, you can technically actually just put the main fin in there by itself, so that when you push it in, it can go all the way backwards. I'm not sure if you would ever need to do that, but that's an option that you have anyway. And along the rail, there is actually a little bit of a stopper there, so it kind of locks the missile in there when it gets further enough, so it doesn't flop out. The entire missile rack ratchets upwards, revealing quite a bit of detail in there. That's actually quite nice. It is kind of a use of the hollow space, of course, but it's nice that it's there. As a matter of fact, look on the bottom side of the IMP, there's quite a lot of detail there. Again, that's not something you typically see on these small, kind of hollowish vehicles, but I'm glad that they've put that in there. Of course, the treads themselves are non-movable and fake, and you have these little rolling wheels for it to roll on. One thing that's a little bit hard to see that's on the back of the Imp are the foot pegs and the tow hook. While the tow hook is perfectly normal and usable, the foot pegs kind of aren't. As you can see, the back of the railing and the missiles are totally in the way of any space a figure would occupy while standing on these. Even when fully retracted down, and when the missile's out of the way, you can still see that a figure has a hard time just being in there. The Imp has a really nicely detailed seat. And of course the control panel right on the top here. This little monitor doesn't have a heads-up display sticker. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't make one for the sticker sheet, but there it is. As well as a little, I'm guessing this is a joystick. It's certainly in the right position to be one. It's a little bit stubby, but I think that's really good because then it's not easily cracked off, and it doesn't harm the figure's thumbs either. And on the side here we have a anti-personnel gun, which is probably the worst designed gun I've ever seen for such an old vehicle. They normally don't look quite as cheap looking as this. There's also a little bit of a problem with this side holding handle here. Perhaps it's really a cocking lever or something, but most people try to use this as a handhold, and it doesn't really work that well. I'll get to that in just a moment. I'll show you just how a figure, the Toxo Viper, as everyone uses, the figure can just kind of sit in there, just kind of half in, half out like that. Put the hand on the control lever, and you can't put the other hand on the other gun while in this very natural position, because this thing is just so far out to the left. The figure is kind of like this. If you're actually trying to get the hand in it, you'd have to kind of twist them sideways in order to get him in. It doesn't look very good. The figure also can go a little bit deeper in here. Well, actually quite a bit deeper in there. And I'm assuming that's the normal driving position. You wouldn't want the attached missiles to bonk him on the head while launching, would you? So why do so many collectors wind up using the Toxo Viper as a permanent driver for the Imp, myself included? Well, there are quite a few reasons. First of all, he actually does look fairly good in it, color-wise. Sure, he has a purple uniform mostly, but the head sticks out with a very contrasting color. He still has the yellow and the red in there, which I think goes overall with this. But the contrasting helmet is something that Hasbro did quite a lot with a number of their drivers. The other thing too is that, well, as a hostile environment trooper, you might not always have, like, well, really a play pattern for this guy. You might not have him out as much, and you wind up saying, well, you want to use this figure for something, might as well make him a permanent driver. Sure, that makes sense. The other thing too is that he's used as the example on the box art for the Imp. But more than that, he's actually shown in the comic books as well. So there's that childhood influence if you remember that. On top of that, this is a very heavily armored vehicle. But yet the figure's head just kind of sticks out here. There's no hatch to cover that over. And out of all the characters, the Toxo Viper has the most heavily armored helmet of everyone. So it makes sense that he would be the driver. I hate to keep going back to this ugly gun, but I mean, besides the fact that it's yellow, and while yes, yellow is on vehicles in other areas, but I believe that really just makes it pop a little bit. But there's no excuse for the gun, because it's so flat and just sort of cartoony, kind of. And with the handle on the side here, way off to the left-hand side, where the figure can't really grip it all that well. To be honest, let's just take this thing out or replace it with something else. Here I have a spare gun from, I think this is the 1986 Serpentor's gun. If you pop that in, doesn't that look quite a bit better? I mean, you don't have to use this specific gun, but honestly, anything would have looked quite a bit better. So what would be the opposite number for the Cobra Imp on the Joe side for a small armored missile launching vehicle? Well, that could only be the 1988 Warthog. Yeah, there's a huge size difference, but I think they're still sort of in the same class. They both have anti-personnel guns, and while the Warthog only has 2 missiles, the small size Cobra Imp more than makes up for it with its 3. But I don't see that as the only rival to the Cobra Imp. The G.I. Joes also have the 1985 bomb disposal, which actually came with mines for it to scoop up. Definitely an opposite number to a mine launching vehicle as well. And keep in mind that while this might have been a 1985 vehicle, it was still available for mail order well into the 90s, so it would have been available at the same time as the Imp, just not in the same retail setting. I'm not really sure how the missile was actually supposed to have operated. On the box art, it just shows this thing splitting up mid-air, with the mine just sort of going off in every which direction. But it's not really possible for the toy to do that. You'd have to kind of lean it downwards and hope that all the rings, well, ring-like mines, actually sort of flow outwards. I'm actually kind of surprised that Hasbro didn't do this, because there's so much tension between the locked-on nose cone and the rest of the shaft here. I'm surprised that they didn't put a spring here. It wouldn't have actually taken a very big spring either, just a small one, just to sort of launch these things out. Because otherwise, you would have to point this thing towards its target. Then this thing would actually have to have cartwheeled in order for it to drop off all of its mines. Of course, you can just imagine it just sort of spreading out every which way you want it to. The other thing I'm a little surprised that they don't really specify is whether this nose cone is just a part of the delivery device or whether it does have its own yield. Basically, that this whole end portion is just for delivery of the mines, and this portion continues on like a missile. It's actually very vague now that I think about it. If you're looking for a Cobra Imp on the aftermarket, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that the Cobra Imp is a very sturdy vehicle. There's pretty much nothing that I can think of that you have to look out for to make sure that it's broken. However, the vehicle is a very nice looking vehicle and is very popular on the aftermarket simply because of that. But then you have to look out for these 24 Cheerio size mines. Make sure they're all there. Now, here is a missile with just the 7 on it, and it's really hard to tell that it's missing a mine. It really does look like it kind of could look like this normally, but there is a gap. And yeah, that 8th one should really be in there.
The IMP here makes his first comic book appearance in the Omova comic run of G.I. Joe in issue number 73.
But But you can't really do that with a toy. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind-the-scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.